Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. In this video, we're going to be planting some bulbs here in Raleigh, North Carolina, zone 7B, 8A, right on the edge of that area. This is a little late for us to be planting bulbs. As I'm standing here, it's the second day of January. Normally, we receive our bulbs. Most of our bulbs come from color blends, and generally they actually send them out at the time to put them in the ground, and pretty close to put them in the ground. So when you order from them, they figure out where you are, and then they ask, you could either get them shipped, right when it's time to put them in the ground, or you can get them shipped earlier if you need to refrigerate them, or they'll refrigerate them for you, all kinds of scenarios. But most of the time, we'd be planting these in the fall, and here we are. We were out of town for a while. We've kept them in good shape. We've kept them in a cool space. They're still all, very firm. Everything looks great. If there's anything in here that we've messed up, by keeping them too long, out of the ground, then I'll just discard them to the side. But it seems like this little bag of Muscari latifolium look great. So these are, this is a bulb that likes moist conditions during the springtime and kind of drier conditions during the summer. So I'm going to be putting them out on the outside of this fenced area because it stays nice and moist all winter, early spring, and then it gets neglected kind of during the summertime. We kind of forget about this side of the fence. So it's kind of the perfect space for it. This particular one is a two-tone lighter color and slightly darker color flower on the same stalk. They are fragrant. These can self-seed themselves a bit. They're not really considered invasive, but they can self-seed themselves a bit. So this is another good reason to have them out here where I've got the curb and I've got a constrained area for them, or an area that can hold them in place if they do over 3 or 4 or 5 years start to get a little bit weedy on us. Really tiny bulbs, which are super easy to plant. And if you've watched the channel for the last week or so, you will have seen we did some little work out here on the outside of the fence, and this soil is actually in pretty good condition out here. I dug up some perennials and I disturbed all this soil, so having it recently disturbed, it will be very, very easy to plant. I'm just going to put these in some clusters. I think these are zone 5 to 8, and we're right on the bottom. This is true with a lot of bulbs for us. Is in our warmer kind of southern climate, not all the bulbs perform all that well. A lot of them need a little bit more winter treatment or a little more cold for a more extended period of time than we get. But there are some that we can grow and grow fairly well, and these Muscari I tend to see coming back pretty reliably everywhere. But again, this is 100 of them in here, so I'm just going to take probably 20, 25, and these will go down. It's usually about 3 times the height of the bulb is kind of the rule, but look at the whatever your whatever bulb it is on the package, it'll always say what it is. But these will naturalize in this space, and they'll kind of come up where they can come up. This boxwood will get bigger in time and probably push them back this way a little bit. Something else that we put over here that we haven't decided yet, maybe but they'll go where they can go over the years. The pointy end of these is pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious that the pointy end is the up, and this is where the roots will emerge down at the bottom. Most bulbs will give you that. Some won't. We're going to plant some anemones in a minute, and it's hard to tell, what's the top and what's the bottom on some. If you don't know, you can plant them sideways, and they'll work it out. That's about how close and how many I'll put in this spot, and I'm just going to put them in a few spaces just like this. The one thing, some bulbs the squirrels will mess with, and some they won't. So they won't mess with daffodils. They will mess with they'll definitely mess with your tulips and a few others. So when I cover this back up, I'll try to tamp it down a bit. If it's something like tulips, you could take you could set something over a metal screen or something like that over the top of it until this soil kind of settles down some. Once it's settled down and packed down, they tend not to go and dig them up but while that soil is loose like it is right now, if it's a bulb they like, they'll definitely come and flip this soil over and take them. The Muscari latifolium or grape hyacinths, as a lot of people call them, normally are just a single solid color, but this is this is a two-tone one that we got from Color Blends. And I'm just gonna make this same kind of bed over here on the other side of the fence as well. I think these say on the tag 2 inches down and 2 inches apart. I tend to put them a little bit closer together than that. But it's fast and easy once you have you've improved the soil so much over time that I can just take that little trowel and clear out a space and set them in here. Quick and easy. Again, this is one that's probably, that's my fault. I've dried it out by not having it in the ground 2 months ago. Literally 2 months ago is when it should have gone in, but they'll still come up. They'll be fine. They've been kept in a cool spot, and so they've gotten some of the cold treatment that they need. Next up is one of the bulbs that definitely tells you when spring is coming. This is Iris reticulata, and a lot of times I'll go over to the J.C. Ralston Arboretum and see the Iris reticulatas blooming as early as middle January. So I'm putting them in again about 2 months late. This variety is called Harmony, and it's lavender blue, but it also has a little bit of yellow and a little bit of white on it. Again, these bloom super early. They're very showy, but it's a very brief flowering time. So I would like to plant these pretty thick. So what I like about them, over at the Ralston, you'll just have a spot here and a spot there where they've planted a bunch really close together. So it's an intense amount of color, but it's very brief. And then this one is one of the better bulbs at just kind of getting out of the way. As soon as it gets any heat on it, it fades back. So by mid to late spring, they'll be gone. So we're putting them in a high profile area, close together. We're gonna get lots of color on them. And then these are, again, really nice about getting out of the way. I wouldn't probably put daffodils here because, they come up and they have the great color and everything, but then that foliage would just be in this high traffic area, would just be lingering until, much later in the spring and into sometimes as early summer. But these are really good looking bulbs, and I have definitely abused them this year. If there are any bulbs in places you can find now, again, as long as they're, as long as they feel firm, haven't just completely dried out, you'll know the difference. It'll be obvious once they dehydrate. When these were taken out of the ground a few months ago, wherever they were done, the Netherlands or wherever I have no idea where these came from, but most likely the Netherlands. When they came out of the ground, they were probably a hair bigger than this. They have, there's a limited amount of moisture in one of these things, and it's coming out as soon as they're dug out of the ground. So again, we have these really highly worked spaces here that are pretty easy to dig in at this point. And I will put a really very generous cluster. It's obvious what the up is on these irises, the little pointy end up. It will say to put these like 3 inches apart, and I just am going to put them closer than that. I really want this to be an intense area of color. And also, one of the things I love about this one is so early in the season. There's just not a lot of opportunity to have this kind of color on other things this early in the year. I just gently kind of drop it on the top like that. It keeps me from knocking them over, and then I can, from there, spread this back over the top and pat them down. The other thing at the Ralston is they're near rocks. We have these rocks on these corners in some places in the garden where the water hose can go around that without decapitating our plants. So that's what you'll see, that these are strategically placed in the angle like that is for that hose to just kind of go around there. But when these irises come up near these rocks like this, they just really shows them off. Most of the bulbs we're showing off in this video are all very small. I brought a shovel out, but I don't think I'm going to need it. Again, this is 4 years into this project, and we sped it up by using wood chips pretty much everywhere and compost, and then the mulch has been redone several times, so it's much easier digging out here. At the old house, if you've followed the channel for a long time, at the old house, I moved in there and I didn't do any of those initial prep things in that garden, and took a much longer period of time to get to this point where I could use a trowel to plant things. You know, everything was with a shovel for a long time, but toward the end, your soil will improve over some period of time. This was extremely compact clay soil out here. Anemones, these, you don't have to worry about which end is up. They look like stones. They literally look like stones. These were soaked overnight, so that's something that you need to do. This variety from Color Blends is called Blue Shades. These flowers are chrysanthemum-like. They're literally just perfect. They bloom a little bit later than Iris reticulata is one of the first things I see bloom bulb-wise in the ground every year. And then you probably get crocus right after that, and then the anemones after that. But they're super, super showy. The flowers are just almost perfect. Part shade, maybe 3 to 4 hours of sun a day is kind of ideal on these. This spot, as we get a little further back here, this maple back here will kind of take over. So they'll be in the full sun when they're coming up and they're in bloom, and then they'll be in shade as that tree comes out, and then of course they'll fade down to the ground like most other bulbs during the summertime. But it looks like they look like little rocks. I plant these. This is another one that I'll plant extremely heavily because I got roots over here, a little bit different than over there. I may actually go and get my shovel. The soil's great, but there's a little more root competition here. I have lots of bulb planting videos on the channel. So we've recently planted daffodils, recently planted tulips. We have species tulips out here. Lots and lots of bulbs, and there's other videos that you can go back and see. There's not a whole lot of difference in terms of planting them other than the depth, and you know, sometimes some of them want some dryness during the summertime or moisture during the summertime. So there are some subtle differences between them, but most of them are pretty much similar in how they go in the ground, how they come up in the spring, and how they go to sleep shortly thereafter. Sometime as the heat tends to run them back into the ground. Just picked 5 in this video that we hadn't covered before. These roots, a lot of these roots here are actually from that maple. Runs the roots all the way over here from the neighbor's garden. This is why I talk about maples not being the friendliest things to garden with. I know everybody loves that fall color, but again, the up end of these is irrelevant. I'm just going to kind of push these down in a little bit deeper. But I can put it there where I broke it up and just thumb them down into the ground. Again, you want these kind of thick. You know, they'll always tell you to space them a little closer or a little further apart, but I think when you're dealing with something that has small, delicate flowers and small, delicate foliage, you're really not going to show up in a garden space unless you pack them in pretty tight. They would eventually. These will spread and naturalize a bit in this area. So eventually they would fill in, but I kind of want it this very first year. We're going to be mulching in about a month and a half. So these will get a little bit of mulch over them. I don't know if they'll already be up at that point. Likely they will be. It's such a crazy year. I mean, I've got our daffodils are up already over here. Crocus is up everywhere. Tulips are breaking the ground. It's January, whatever. It's kind of normal to see them up a bit. I would really rather not see them up 3 and 4 inches like they are now. But you know, that's life. They've got a little cold on them, and then we went into a warm streak, and now they're up pretty high. If we were going to get extreme cold coming, and I had my daffodils and other things up 3 or 4 inches, I might put some sort of, you can take a pot and put upside down over top of them or something like that. They're extremely cold hardy, cold resistant. All of these are. In fact, I'm on the southern end of everything I'm showing you in this video. But there is a limit. you know, and especially when you have a cold wind blowing across the foliage, it can discolor the foliage. And then what happens is, what happened with our daffodils last year is they had come up this much, then we got extremely cold wind over top of them and it burned them some, the foliage. And then when the whole thing grew up and it was in flower, the top of the foliage looked really, really bad. So I may protect them, most years not, but they are all up extremely early. Next up is Kiana Doxa, which is Glory of the Snow, is the common name for it. A lot of times you'll see these naturalized in lawns. We have a lawn up the street from us that in the spring just has these amazing blue and whitish flowers out there across their entire lawn. They're willing to hold off on their spring mowing in order to do that because, you know, these come up with the foliage, they bloom, and that foliage needs to stick around for a minute before it, you know, for a month or so before it goes away. So you'd have to, if you want to naturalize these in your lawn, and you can, you have to keep in mind your lawn may look a little tattered for a little while in the spring before you can get out there and mow it to make sure that these are going to come back reliably. These need to be moist year round, not wet. Not wet by any means, but not in a spot. If I put these in a dry shade space in the back garden, they'd have enough moisture in the spring to do their thing, but then I think they would dry out during the summer and they would not come back reliably. We have this spot around our palm here by the back porch that we have some sedum growing around, and this area tends to stay moist year round, but not wet. I can come in here and look like I'm going to damage this sedum, but this sedum recovers so quick. So I'm just going to put a few patches of these in and amongst this sedum, and again, they're going to come up, show off a bit. The sedum will fill in around them as it gets going again in the spring, and then these will fade back to the ground and come up year over year. These are pretty reliable here in our area. Again, waiting to way later than these should have been planted, but they're still in, again, they're in great shape. So I'm not worried. You know, again, a naturalizing bulb like this, I don't need every single one of them to come up. I need a few to come up, and then they'll naturalize. Over some period of time. I'll come in, just random, completely random. This little spot right in front of it, usually gets a few annuals to go in, so I'll put it back there where I won't re-dig them up. So the other nice thing about using a spot like this under this sedum is I'm less likely to tear them up later, but we do write down where bulbs are going in the ground so that we hopefully don't tear them up later. It's not always an easy thing. There's some, in this bag from Color Blends, there's some small little bulblets that had broken off the side of them. I'll throw those in. Likely one or two of them will come up. Next up is Winter's Wolfsbane or Aranthus. This is definitely one I'm testing the southern boundary, you know, the boundary of. These are typically hardy in zones 4 to 7, and again on our updated zone map, over the last 15 years, we've trended so warm that these are probably a little less reliable for me. But this is one, I love this bulb because it comes up in flowers before the foliage emerge, and I love plants that do that. I love plants that do that. There's some of our, you know, there are several spring things that come up and do that. Where, you know, you just see this flower and it's like, what in the heck? Just sticking up out of the ground, and then the foliage joins it shortly thereafter. These are great for woodland paths, and especially those of you who are in cooler areas. It does look like little stones, same as the anemones. They don't have to go down very far. Very easy to, you know, very easy to plant. These are delicate little things, and they really need to go in and be planted, you know, fairly close together. I will put some separation between them, but, you know, fairly close together. Down, you know, I probably got them 1.5 inches apart. You can actually tell the bottom and the top on these. You can see where the roots were on them the year before, so, you know, if you want to examine them, you can. If you can't figure out which is the top and which is the bottom, you can definitely tell which is the side, and you can put them on their side. if you want to think about that. But I'll take just several spots along this little woodland path and plant a cluster of them, and they'll do some little delicate flowers will pop up above these leaves and mulch and stuff, which are, again, super interesting at a time of year. These bloom a little later winter than some of the other bulbs that we have. These tend to be, hair later. I put them in the line of about the time the tulips will be blooming, so a little bit after some of the early daffodils. We have thought, the one thing about the bulb selections that we have out here, if you're purchasing bulbs from Color Blends or wherever you're purchasing from, we are thinking about the timing of them. So we'll have that Iris reticulata just pop right out of the ground and bloom not that long from now, and then one right after another for about 2 months. By the time that period of time ends, the other shrubs and other things are waking up in the garden and we'll join them. We also, our taller blooming bulbs out here, we planted amongst other perennials, so the other perennials can kind of come up around them and kind of take away from the ugliness, I don't want to say ugliness, of the decline of the bulbs. So there's a period of time where you have to leave the foliage up on these things, the daffodils, the tulips, whatever, and they don't look very attractive as they're dying back to the ground. Other perennials, again, we have come up around them and kind of mask that a bit. So make sure you're following along with the channel. One other point on the bulbs is I don't fertilize them when I'm putting them in the ground. We will fertilize this entire garden mid to late February, early March, something like that. I have a video that'll go up on the channel at that time. That's the only time of year we fertilize them. This is, again, there's been so much soil improvement in this garden. We have plenty of beneficial bacteria, beneficial fungi, plenty of organic material in this soil. We have all things working for us. We really just don't need a whole heck of a lot of fertilizer at this point. So there'll be some small amount added once a year. After that, this garden just kind of takes care of itself. So thank you very much for following along with the channel. Again, there's lots and lots of bulb videos on the channel, including a playlist called Bulbs if you want to go over and look through our bulb list, catalog. We'll start to do some tours of the garden here by the time we get around to mid-February. There's lots of things in bloom, obviously depending on how cold it is outside. And once we start those up, you can see some of these things in flower. Thanks for following along.